The TSA has secrets, and if you travel, these are things that you really should be aware of. The first is that your valuables aren't always safe with the TSA. Last year, a story went viral showing TSA agents caught red-handed sneaking their sticky fingers into people's bags in those bins as they pushed them along the conveyor belt. I'm not really sure what these guys were thinking, but it wasn't their finest moment. On one hand, I think TSA theft must be pretty rare. First, because there's literally cameras everywhere, and second, because they need to go through a thorough background check and interview process to get the job. On the other hand, watching this video is enough to make me rethink my process when I pass through airport security. Normally, I just cram all of my valuables into my fanny pack or my sling pack, and then I put it directly in the bin, but perhaps a smarter option would be to put all my valuables in my sling pack and then wrap that in my rain jacket and then put it in the bin so people can't slip their fingers in there. Either way, avoid leaving the security checkpoint until you've checked to make sure that all your valuables are accounted for. And if you do happen to lose something in the airport, don't lose hope, because I have some good news for you in a second. Also, just because TSA agents have extensive background checks in the US doesn't necessarily mean that's the case in other countries, so make sure to always keep your wits about you. Speaking of TSA officers, TSA calls themselves officers, but most aren't actually law enforcement officials, and they don't have the power to arrest you, detain you, or interrogate you. They just use officer as their title and wear uniforms and badges, so they kind of look like police officers, just to give the impression of authority and power. But in reality, the only authority they have is to inspect your belongings and prevent you from passing through the screening areas. For anything beyond that, they need to call the actual airport police, which are oftentimes nearby anyways. TSA likes to sometimes flex the power they do have by confiscating ridiculous items in the name of safety. Don't get me wrong here, I am thankful for those airport security officers who do their jobs diligently and try to keep us safe on flights. But for those officers who just confiscate things to be difficult, come on. For example, one Marine veteran on Reddit shared a story about how he had a civilian flight and had his weapons pre-approved. The TSA officers stopped him, searched his bag, and then started giving him a hard time because he had 2 sets of toenail clippers. They ended up confiscating one of the toenail clippers because if you have 1, apparently it's okay. But if you have 2, now that's a security threat. The kicker is this Marine had an empty machine gun on his shoulder and a 6-inch knife strapped to his chest, but the TSA officer decided to give a fuss about the extra toenail clippers. If you think that sounds as ridiculous as I do, give this video a like. One time I had a bike lock cable confiscated, which I guess could kind of maybe be used as a weapon, but I had been traveling with it for years with no problems. But I'm curious to hear your stories of any uncomfortable TSA experiences, so share them in the comments so we can all read them and cringe together. Okay, it's 2 a.m. and I have 6 hours until my flight in the airport here. I'm too cheap to pay the $60 per hour for an actual bed, and so we'll get into the rest of the TA tips tomorrow, but I need to find a place to sleep now. I think it's gonna be right here. Despite all their strict rules, you might be shocked to hear just how often they miss security threats. In 2015, Homeland Security ran some undercover tests trying to smuggle in explosives and other mock weapons into busy US airports. What percentage of those weapons do you think made it past the TSA unnoticed? 5, 10, 50%? Turns out the weapons made it past these TSA checkpoints 67 out of 70 times, which is a 95% failure rate. 2 years later, after giving them a chance to fix all of the security weaknesses, they ran another undercover test, which showed that still half of the weapons were passing through successfully. I'm really hoping that things have improved since then, but just a couple months ago, they released a new report showing that people had bypassed parts of airport security over 300 times this year. Most of these were accidents and not full-on security breaches, but it still shows that there are some vulnerabilities. This next one's not really a secret, but it's definitely an important one to know if you want to avoid issues during your time in the airport. But first, let me find a table because I don't want to fall down these escalators. You might think it's okay to lock up your bags with a TSA approved lock, whether that's a standalone lock like this one, right here or one that's built into your luggage. But that's not always a good idea. You can identify these locks because they have this red diamond on them, which is the Travel Sentry logo. The idea is that TSA officers have a special key to open these locks in case they need to search your bags. The problem is, every time I fly internationally and put these locks on my checked luggage, then my luggage arrives with no lock and broken zippers. What the frick, TSA? That's when I realized that just because it's TSA approved doesn't mean it's approved all over the world. If you check the Travel Sentry website, it says it's approved in 82 countries, so less than half. So it's possible that my locks are getting ripped off in those unsupported countries. I still use these locks all the time though when traveling because it adds in an extra layer of security even when you're outside of the airport. That said, while they help prevent opportunistic theft, they're not bulletproof. A determined thief can use the old pen trick to open up your zipper, or they can just order one of the TSA keys somewhere online. Before we get into the rest of these TSA tips, make sure to subscribe for more tips on how to travel smarter. Let's go. Next up is that if you don't want to go through the body scanner, then you have the right to opt out. Well, at least most people do, and you can see them right behind me right now. According to the TSA website, the only time that you can't opt out is that if your boarding pass has been marked for enhanced screening. And if you do opt out, prepare for a good old-fashioned pat-down. This slows down the process and may make TSA a little bit grumpy, but if you're lacking a little bit of physical affection and you want to get some human touch, this is your way to do it. When these body scanners first came out, there was a lot of people that protested and didn't like them because they basically showed your real body naked on the screen, and it was an invasion of privacy. Some airport workers who have left comments on Reddit have reported that they've overheard TSA agents back in the day sometimes making fun of people's bodies as they pass through behind their backs. But nowadays they've updated the software so that the screen just shows a generic human body with no details. Next, after some digging, I found something interesting about how the TSA handles confiscated items. If you get something confiscated while leaving your home airport, you might be able to get it back, but there's a trick to it. The TSA website says, and I quote, "Federal law and operational considerations restrict the return of prohibited items that are left at the security checkpoint." Now that doesn't sound promising, but it also says that TSA makes every effort to reunite passengers with items left behind at the airport checkpoint. Lost and found items are retained by TSA for a minimum of 30 days and if not claimed are either destroyed, turned over to a state agency for surplus property, or sold by TSA as excess property, blah, 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 blah. At a number of locations, lost and found items are turned over to the airport at the end of each day. So if you realize that you have a prohibited item in your bag, your first best option is to try to quick run out and see if you still have time to switch it over to your check bag if it's still in the check-in counter. But if that's not an option, try this. So you definitely won't be able to get your item back if you let the TSA confiscate it from you. But you might be able to get it back if you accidentally lose your item while going through the checkpoint, because they later turn it over to the lost and found where it'll stay there for 30 days. And if you're in a small airport, you could even try quickly walking over to wherever the lost and found is and say that you found this item, and then maybe they'll just hold it. Some TSA checkpoints also have mailing stations right next to the checkpoint that you can mail yourself whatever prohibited item you have, obviously for an expensive fee. And if it's a really important item and none of these strategies work, your last resort could be to search those surplus stores where all of these goods end up at the end after those 30 days in the lost and found. Keep in mind, all of this information comes directly from the TSA website, but other countries may have different rules. For example, in Colombia, it was super easy to have the agent hold my special utility knife for me until I got back. He just had me fill out a form, and then I picked it up from their office when I returned through the airport. Okay, so I know that I've been kind of hard on the TSA in this video, but the truth is that they don't always act like they have a stick up their butt. Sometimes they actually have a sense of humor, like on their funny Instagram account where they post all the weird and crazy things that they find from people trying to pass through security. I was thoroughly impressed at some of their dad jokes and cringy puns. I honestly think that sometimes TSA agents aren't really that grouchy, They're just pretending to be grouchy to add in that intimidation factor and demand respect and catch the bad guys. They got a tough job and they get a bad rap. Even though they might be real human beings with feelings and good intentions, that still doesn't mean you want to piss them off. And if there's one surefire way to piss them off, it's doing anything that I mentioned in this video. Please, please, please avoid doing any of these things unless you want an incredibly uncomfortable and awkward and stressful experience. All right, guys, like, subscribe, do the things. Love you. Bye-bye.